A Facebook whistleblower has said that she has not been allowed to present her testimony and evidence before India's parliament, despite her willingness to do so and despite a parliamentary committee actually being in favor of it. I'm Barkadat, you're with the Mojo story. Today, our newsmaker is Sophie Zhang. She is Facebook's whistleblower who famously turned down a severance package because she did not want to sign an agreement that would prevent her from speaking out against what she found were questionable work ethic practices at her erstwhile place of employment. Sophie Zhang, of course, was a data scientist who used to look at fake or inauthentic accounts on the platform. She called out the use of these accounts in several countries, including India. She has since presented evidence that while fake accounts or fake clusters linked to the Congress and the Aam Aadmi Party were taken down, one particular cluster linked to a BJP member of parliament was not acted against. She's been willing to present her evidence before our parliament, but has not got the go ahead from the Lok Sabha speaker to do so. Let's go across now to Sophie Zhang, who's on this program with us to talk a little bit about what the last few months have been for her since she took on this fight in the public domain. In fact, globally, let's remember that what Facebook has been charged with is not specific or unique only to India. But of course, for Indians, we're interested in what happened and what's happening in our own country. Thank you very much, Ms. Zhang, for joining us. Let me start straight away by asking you what you say happened in 2019 when you first stumbled upon these fake clusters. The clusters were not being run only by the BJP. There were other parties as well who were indulging in this activity. There was an upcoming election in Delhi in early 2020. That was the context. You pointed these out. Some were taken down, others were not. Can you take us through what happened?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with yourself and to speak to the Indian people. So in late 2019, I found 3 networks of fake accounts. I call them IT cells for Indian audiences. Eventually there were 5, but there were 3 at the start. And so when India is an important country to Facebook, and so when I found these, Facebook quickly agreed to take them down, and they were willing to take down all of these, up until we found that one of them was tied to a sitting member of parliament, namely the honorable member from Kaushambi, Vinod Kumar Sonkar, who is, I believe, the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Ethics, quite ironically. And so as soon as this discovery was made, I was not able to get a response from Facebook. It was as if I was talking to a stone wall. I asked repeatedly, and during this, and I never could get a straight answer or response. During this case, while this was ongoing, I also found a new activity that was beginning to support the app in Delhi. We know that it was supporting the app, but we do not actually know who was behind it. And so it took me a while to convince Facebook to take this activity down, and after I did so, I would ask them, well, we're coming to a decision here in Delhi about this pro-app IT cell. Can we also come to a decision about this pro-BJP IT cell? We wouldn't want people to accuse Facebook of being partial, of taking down IT cells supporting the app, the Congress, but not those supporting the BJP. And well, this became a self-fulfilling prophecy because I'm making that argument now, but we didn't know that at the time. And so, and so I could never get an answer from them on the matter. Later, when we found IT cells in Punjab supporting the Congress that were connected to 3 sitting members of the Congress in Punjab, that would be apologies for mispronouncing their name, Sundarsham Arora, Ravinder Singh Ladi, and Arun Dogra, the first 2 have since joined the BJP, I understand. I mean, when that discovery was made, Shivnath Sukro personally gave the order to have have it taken down in 8 hours, compared to the lack of action of any sort against the network connected to Vinod Sonkar.
So to be clear, you are saying that the specific clusters associated with the Congress in Punjab at the time and the Aam Aadmi Party were taken down, And when you brought this to the notice of Mr. Chukral, he ordered the taking down of those two clusters, but exempted the ones associated with the BJP MP, Mr. Sonkar. Am I summarizing you correctly?
Uh, it's close. I did not personally take it to Srivnath Sukro. I took it to a lower level policy person who reported to him, and she was the one who took it up to him. And she also said that she would take up the cases associated with Mr. Sankar up to her superiors and other teams, but I never heard a further response from her on that matter.
Did you ever get an explanation internally, you or your colleagues or your immediate supervisor whom you took this to, as to why there was an exemption for one party and not the others?
No one ever explained to me. There was not even an official decision made, in the same way that the speaker has officially not denied my testimony to the Lok Sabha. He had simply chosen to sit on it forever. It's a deeply concerning parallel to myself.
And from what I understand, there was an initial cluster of fake accounts associated with the BJP that was taken down as well. It was only this particular cluster associated with the BJP MP, Mr. Sonkar, who has since become the chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Ethics, that was not acted against. Am I correct?
Yes, that is correct. This was in December. This was in mid-December of 2019. I'm not sure when he became the chair of the Parliamentary Committee.
Yes. But there was an initial BJP cluster of fake accounts that was taken down.
That's correct. They took down one pro-BJP cluster that was not knowingly connected to any BJP MP. It was one connected to Mr. Sankar. They had already agreed to take it down, but so they suddenly went silent upon it afterwards. It was deeply concerning to myself, because for me, the reason that it was linked to a sitting MP was more reason to take it down, not less.
Yes. Obviously, as you have seen, Facebook has repeatedly denied your comments and even the documentation you've put out, calling it a mischaracterization. What do you think they might mean by a mischaracterization?
What they mean is, we want to disagree with this, but we don't know how, so we give a vague disagreement that sounds, because, I mean, they might want to say that these documents are forgeries, but they can't, because I mean, I'm just one person, and there are so many people enough people who worked on this that they can't claim that these are forgeries. They already acknowledge the authenticity to the Guardian, and anyone can see for themselves what's contained within them. They might want to argue that I'm taking them out of context, but they can't, because I was the main person who worked on these. If there is any expert on these documents, it is myself. And so they are unable to come up with any argument, and so this is the best they can do. Mr. Sukro has testified to the Lok Sabha that my statements are supposedly mischaracterizations and unsubstantiated. Mr. Sukro is also listed in the documentations as having personally approved my takedowns, and as Facebook wants to claim that this is a forgery, which they have not done because they cannot, it is difficult to see how Mr. Sukro's testimony to the Lok Sabha can be reconciled with the truth. I understand that it is a severe crime to lie in testimony to the Lok Sabha, and the fact that this is even a possibility goes to show how scared Facebook is of the truth in India.
One of the things that you've pointed out is that the bigger a country, the more important a market it is to Facebook, the tougher it gets actually for transparent governance to become a reality. So you have actually chronicled how you called out similar sort of a proliferation of fake accounts in countries like Azerbaijan, in Honduras, and those countries did act, or action was taken rather in those countries in a way that it was not taken in India. And you've suggested a fear factor that has influenced these decisions. Could you elaborate?
Yes, absolutely. Because I mean, I'm sorry to say it, but different countries are of different importance to companies like Facebook. My main findings came in countries like Azerbaijan and Honduras, where Facebook did act, and Albania, where Facebook refused to act. And those are countries I doubt the average Indian has even heard of or knows much about. Which same for Americans for that matter. In those cases, I had caught the governments of each of those three countries essentially running IT cells directly tied to the government in order to support the ruling government. In the case of Honduras, Facebook took almost a year to act. In the case of Azerbaijan, Facebook took more than a year to act. In the case of Albania, Facebook never acted. But in the first case of the first two countries, when they did act, even though it took a year, which was far too long, they 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 still took down the fake accounts and the real accounts of governmental employees tied to them, and made the public announcement: we cut fake accounts ran by the Honduran government, by employees of the Azeri ruling party, etc. And because this was a move they were willing to take, because frankly they were not winning. They were not afraid of the governments of Honduras and Azerbaijan in the same way they are afraid of the governments of India, because the cost to Facebook of alienating India is much greater than those two countries. The Indian government can ban Facebook in India. They can arrest Facebook employees in India, whereas a ban of Facebook in Honduras or Azerbaijan would be laughable in scope, and there are no Facebook employees I know of in those nations to arrest. And so this sort of importance is a double-edged sword, because on one hand, due to the lower priority, it took much longer for Facebook to act. They did not care as much. But on the other hand, the type of care that they give is not the sort that is meaningful to the people of those countries. But Facebook cared more about India, but they cared specifically more about the power players in India, the politicians and governments. They did not care about the Indian people, and they built a system in which there is justice for the common person and impunity for the rich and influential, and that is no justice at all.
Let me ask you this, your testimony that has not taken place before our parliament. How did that process start? The suggestion that you might be able to. We know that the chair of the Parliamentary Committee is an opposition politician, Shashi Tharoor. He was in favor of your testifying, but it needed consent from the Lok Sabha Speaker, Mr. Birla, which has not come through. Did anybody reach out to you officially to testify from this committee? What happened? Can you take us through the process?
Yes, absolutely. So to be clear, I had offered in news interviews when I came forward 13 months ago to testify. Unfortunately, I think none of those interviews were aired because people were quite understandably more distracted by the tragedy of the epidemic at the time and rapidly reorientated the reporting.
Yeah.
So, so this did not come to the notice of the Indian press and people until the fall of 2021 last year, by which point I had already testified to the European and British parliaments, I believe, and so I had reiterated my offer to testify before the parliament of any democratic nation. I believe the Internet Freedom Foundation also issued a call for myself and Francis Hogan to testify. And anyways, the Standing Committee on IT reached out to inquire whether I wanted to give any submissions and to testify. I offered them my documentation, the same documentation that has since been published in full by The Wire, and offer to testify. I understand that any further details regarding our interactions are protected under parliamentary privilege, and I'm trying to respect everyone involved. Sorry. But
Yes.
it's been public, though, that the committee voted unanimously to invite me at the end of November, which I'm sure must have been very difficult, given how difficult it is for BJP and Congress to be unanimous on any issue today. And since then, I have heard nothing from the Speaker's office. And I understand the committee has tried to get in touch with him. News organizations have tried to get in touch with him. I've tried to get in touch with him directly. Two months ago, at this point, I asked the Indian consulate in San Francisco if they could help. It reminds me of my time at Facebook when I asked about why they weren't taking down the fake accounts of Vinod Zonkar.
Basically, there's silence.
Exactly. He has invented a pocket veto for himself, just as President Deo Singh invented a pocket veto in 1986 to block the postal bill.
Yes. Here's my question. What a lot of people might want to know this. What makes you a sort of well-settled employee at Facebook, now Meta, decide to turn on your company? What was the tipping point? I think a lot of people might not know about your 7,000 word plus post on the failures of Facebook, as you called it then. You were offered a severance package for your silence. You turned it down. What was the tipping point for you to turn into a whistleblower?
There was never any specific single tipping point. In stories, there will be one dramatic moment in which everything changes, but that rarely happens in real life. I joined Facebook from the start, wanting to make it better from the inside. And I never expected it to go as far as it did. But I felt that it was my duty to the world, to society, to try and make a difference as much as I could. And every time I failed within the system, I chose to go one step further. when I when when I was, for instance, with the IT cells I found in India, when I wasn't able to get action, I escalated to policy. I presented on it at the policy at a summit in order to get the attention to more employees. When that didn't work, I tried convincing Facebook employees with my farewell memo. When that didn't work, I came forward later to the public as a whistleblower. When that didn't work, I offered my testimony to the Lok Sabha. I offered my documentation and to testify and to fly to India to testify, and that still didn't work. And so now I am resorting to the final arbiter, the Indian people, to whom I've submitted my documentation so they can decide for themselves. Ultimately, becoming a whistleblower is it's a difficult route. I mean, I was very well paid, certainly in my role at Facebook. I was paid something like $200,000 US dollars a year, which is quite a lot for any Indian. But it was never about the money for me. I've actually refused any compensation for speaking or writing since coming forward. It was about the, like many. I mean, I've spoken about this elsewhere, but like many people, I've been failed by authorities when I was a child. People who were supposed to protect me had failed to do so, and different people react differently to that sort of betrayal. For myself, I made a promise when I was much younger that if I ever found myself in a position of authority, I would do the best to prevent anyone else from suffering the same fate that I did. I certainly never expected it to go as far as it did, but life is full of these unexpected things.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I can hear the pain in your voice even today. How old were you when you experienced this betrayal in a circle, I imagine, of trust, or that you mistakenly took for a safe space?
I was 13 years old when my father decided to beat me until I was no longer trans. I considered running away, but decided that it was better to stay in an abusive household than to be homeless on the streets. I prepared excuses for when I showed up to school later with bruises across my face and blood, bruises across my arms and blood across my face, but no one asked. I mean, I would have given them excuses, but I mean, it was not their job to ask, but they still should have had a responsibility.
This was your own father?
Yes, he was an avid Chinese nationalist. I suppose I suppose that's one thing I can relate to Indian people about, in being brutally beaten by angry Chinese nationalists. I'm joking.
And no, I know you're I mean, I know you're being ironic. What was his inability to, internalize that he would turn violent with you? You were a child.
I think I think that I mean, like many people, he considered corporal punishment to be typical and normal, and like many people might, he considered that when there can never be too much of a good thing. But if something is not failing, then you need to try more of it. And so I think you can see where that sort of mentality went in the end. I can't read minds. I just try to
Yeah.
rationalize and understand as best as I can.
And before I come back to Facebook and your fight, clearly this incident in your life shaped, as you said, what you decided to do later, that when you had the authority, you would wield it for good, you would wield it for justice. But how did that end then with your father? Were you able to reconcile ever? Did it remain, did you decide I can never forgive an abusive parent? This was meant to be my safe space. It turned out to be the exact opposite. What happened, and how did that define you permanently for life?
He disowned me 12 years ago, and Well, according to himself, he was not disowning me. Rather, I was disowning myself by rejecting the life, body, name, whatever he had made for me, or something like that. Because people like to rationalize. I have not spoken with him since. He, I mean, I know you'll probably I know you'll
No,
probably want to contact him or something to get his side of the story. I no.
no.
Okay,
I'm not
good.
thinking that at all. I'm just actually trying to understand, or not even trying to understand. I do understand how this experience as a child, as you said, shaped what you later did as an adult. And I was just trying to connect those dots for our audience. And of course, again, I apologize because I know it's painful for
Oh,
you
it's all right.
to recount this. When you turned whistleblower, and since you've turned whistleblower, how has life been for you? Has it been difficult? Have you received threats? Have you been under constant scrutiny? How is life as a young whistleblower?
It's difficult, but I'm managing. I'm an extreme introvert. I don't like public attention. I don't like the spotlight. I can't imagine why anyone would ever want to do that. I would much rather stay home and pet my cats. But most people don't get to do what they want in life. I'm sure that most people would prefer not to have to wake up at 8 a.m. to go into the office, but they do it anyways. It's important, and it's the same principle for myself. There are plenty of people who have risked and suffered far more than I have.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I stay home and pet my cats, and they keep me sane.
Yeah.
I don't.
What about earning a living? I mean, you turned down you knocked a $200,000 job. You turned down a $64,000 severance package. You don't charge money for your public appearances on this issue that you're fighting, kind of like a lone warrior with a lot of media attention, but it's still a lonely battle. What about being able to be financially independent?
I have a lot of savings. Like I said, I made something like 200,000 a year. I spent my actual spending is like maybe 15% of that each year. I don't know how anyone. I mean, there are plenty of people who spend that much, but I can't imagine spending that much myself. But I mean, to each their own.
Yeah.
This partly goes back to my background as well. I mean, I was disowned when I was 19, so I had to figure out budgeting and independence and self-sufficiency from a young age. And
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm sure people who grew up who I mean, I didn't quite grow up poor, but I had a similar experience. And people who grew up poor and become wealthier might keep some of that for granted into later life. But
Yeah.
yeah, like, so I have savings for now. My girlfriend is happy to support me if she wants. I can be a stay-at-home housewife. Maybe that will cancel out the part in which I have a girlfriend for the social conservatives.
Yeah. No, of course, I hope you get to live the life that you've always wanted to as a child and were penalized with violence. I'm sure there were many other battles along the way, like social prejudice, but to receive violence at that from your father is a different level of pain. I want to come back to Facebook. Uh, you have spoken about the sort of culture of IT cells in different countries. IT cells, of course, are the sort of designated teams within political parties that are responsible for online behavior and strategy. And you've spoken about how this is a culture, political culture, that is now completely normalized in India and the pitfalls of that. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. Because I think it surprises Indians whenever I say this, but IT cells are not normal in the Western world. They would not be typical in the United States, in Britain, in France. And if a US politician were found involved in this, it would be utterly shocking. But to
No, but what
India,
about Trump? What about Trump and the whole Russian bots thing that took place in the US election?
n- no one has accused Donald Trump of personal and the Republican Party of personally using fake accounts or bots to become elected. This was fake accounts from outside the country that were being used to influence politics. And although this was terrible, it was not something that was normalized within the country, and it was shocking precisely for that reason. because a US politician would not consider engaging in something similar, whereas in India, this has become sort of an IT cell arms race in which it became so normalized that each political party feels that they have to do it, because if they don't, the rivals will still do it, and the rivals will gain an advantage. And furthermore, because the nature of an IT cell is to not be seen, to pretend to be real people, if a political party stops, they won't even be rewarded for it, because people will still assume that you're doing it, because everyone does it, of course, and you can't know for certain who does it.
Yeah.
In the uh, the United States is a democracy. India is a democracy. Even North Korea is officially a democracy, uh, but they're not democracies in the same way. Azerbaijan is so democratic that in 2013 they accidentally released election results the day before the actual election. True story. Like in some countries, vote buying scandals are typical. In others, they will be unthinkable. I, in Britain, for instance, suppose there was a vote buying scandal. It wouldn't matter if the perpetrator was unrelated to a political party. It wouldn't matter if no one had known what they were doing. That image would still tar the political party, and who would promptly disown them, both out of principle and to avoid being tarred with that stain themselves. And
Yeah.
this and furthermore, in countries like the Britain, the United States, the political strategists and etc. would never even think to suggest this. Whereas in India, I'm sure that every politician is told they have to do this or they won't win. And part of it is logistical as well, of course. In India, you can purchase a geophone from Reliance for maybe the equivalent of $5 or something. You can pay someone very cheaply each day. In the United States, if you have to purchase a phone for $100, hire people for $10 an hour. That is much less economic. And before you say hire someone from India, they do not have the necessary political knowledge and language ability to
Yeah.
convincingly persuade people in U.S. politics.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And of course, I think as we've seen in election, more than even Facebook, it's WhatsApp forwards that actually often do become the vehicles of fake news and propaganda. And they're used by all parties as are fake accounts. It's just that what you have suggested and charged Facebook with is a kind of kindness to those in power. And tomorrow, if the parties were to flip around, it would be the same, because I think what you're talking about is not being able to hold power to account and not about ideological leanings, right?
Yes, that's exactly the crux of the issue, because right now there's an ongoing arms race. If suppose that Facebook would actually doing its job properly and fairly enforcing the rules, then no one would gain a distinct advantage, and it would be possible for the political parties to come together, come to an arms control agreement in the same way the U.S. Soviet Union came to an arms control agreement on nuclear weapons, or for this ability to be legalized. If doing so simply meant that no one would lose an advantage, people would simply spend less money on this. But right now, the government has an advantage, and it is deeply hard for whoever has an advantage to give up that advantage willingly. The-
Yeah.
And this is the road Facebook has built, a road in which IT cells are normalized, and whoever is in power has an advantage, and therefore has no motive to change it. I don't see any paths forward unless the Indian people rise up themselves and demand an end to this madness, or unless someone uniquely brave and honest is elected who is willing to give up this advantage.
Yeah, and that would be my final question. A lot of people in India kind of look at this debate around Facebook as yet another political debate. If you had to say directly to the people of India why this concerns everybody, that this is not about party politics alone, what would you say?
I would say that fundamentally, democracy cannot survive when the voices of the people are being drowned out, but by by a vast amount of fake voices controlled by shady political insiders. Imagine if during the British India, Mahatma Gandhi came forward but was drowned out by by fake pro Raj voices claiming that he was a traitor or something. Imagine if Indira Gandhi had declared her emergency and those dissidents were drowned out by pro-government voices. in the online world, it's so easy for a few people to pretend to be thousands, hundreds of thousands. In real life, to get people on the streets, you need actual people, and that's the distinction. It builds a world in which dictators are empowered, and the people have lost their power.
Yes, thank you. That's very, very powerful. And, in some ways, every single day that we're online, we are unknowingly surrendering a bunch of rights because none of us, in fact, even read the fine print. So there are all kinds of questions for our democracy, for our rights as citizens, and not just in India, but globally. Thank you very much, Sophie. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and we'll keep following this story through. Thank you, and be well.
Thank you. Have a good one. It's a pleasure to speak with you and the Indian people.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.